People who interview job applicants. What's your best things were going well until. Story. Interviewing people for a job as assistant of the manager. Only condition was they should speak French C1 level at least. So more than just fluent, and their resume was sorted by fluency, so I only saw C2/C1. A lot of the people were doing quite well actually. Then, every time the same single question. Bon. Ça va on a fini. Vous pouvez baisser la garde. Vous avez appris le français dans quel coin? 9 times out of 10, I could see their face blooming red. End of the play. Moral. Never lie on your resume. We were interviewing for a senior network engineer role. Interviewee put in his resume he has a CCNP and worked with multiple routing protocols. We started with a very basic networking question. Me. What's the difference between VLANs and subnets? Interviewee. Well look, basically end users go into a VLAN and a subnet is what separates a stack of routers. I just stopped the technical side of the interview after that question and asked how he passed his CCNP certification. I assume he either brain dumped or had to have paid someone to take the exam for him. I am not a networking person, but I do understand the concepts, and I realized it took me a while to figure out why you're asking about two seemingly very different things. Then, oh, it's two ways of partitioning systems into networks, and a key difference is whether the systems are aware they are partitioned. On the other side of this, I was the interviewee, and things were going well, except when going over my work history, I mistakenly said, and after Company X, I decided to pursue my next role. The interviewer noticed that Company X wasn't on my CV. Company X had employed me for about 10 days. It was a total disaster, and they had terminated me decisively. It was 10 days, so absolutely not going on the CV. But my interviewer put all of that together very quickly, and the interview went downhill fast. All because of my flub. It's all good though, because that job would have freaking sucked. I was sitting in on an interview. To be honest, the guy wouldn't have gotten the job anyway because he left the company and was then wanting to come back, and the interviewer wasn't impressed with that. He said, oh, being a manager is easy. To cheer the team up you just give them treats, like giving lollipops to children to get them to do what you want. He left the company and was then wanting to come back, and the interviewer wasn't impressed with that. This is a bad blanket rule to have. You can have someone with a lot of experience who knows your organization and has some fresh insights too. After going back and forth with a candidate for about 15 minutes, I felt there was something I was missing. He seemed professional, personal, and had more than enough experience to do well in the role. I decided to ask a very point-blank question regarding what working with my company would look like for him in an ideal situation. His response? He was looking to be hired and laid off in 2 months so he could continue collect unemployment insurance. Noped him right out of my office after that answer. Another memorable one was the girl who showed up at my office an hour early for her interview. She arrived 15 minutes before I even got there in the morning, and proceeded to scold me for the lack of professionalism for being late for her interview. After having her pull the email up on her phone to confirm she was an hour early, she still refused to accept blame and wanted an apology, where I figured at that point in time it would be best to shake hands and part ways. She was not very happy leaving and defiantly didn't spare any nice words on her way out. I've always wished there was a glass door for employers. I'd have loved to leave both of those candidates an honest review. Until he told me he raped a girl. I was like, why would you share something like that with me? All of a sudden his response, I don't know. I feel safe around you. I reported him to HR and I don't know what happened next. Well, now, I don't feel safe around you. I work directly in the city center, and when I asked for the reasons of working at my company, his only reasoning was because it would be great to meet with friends directly in the city after work and enjoy nice afternoons. That was the end of the interview. Any business student who comes into my business without any world job experience and tries to tell me, in their first interview, how they would do things so much better than how we do it now, you'll be surprised how often it happens, and how useless these folks are when you actually give them a chance to run their ideas viral. I worked in a game shop and we used to follow up the interview with a trial shift to see how the person interacted with customers. The guy I interviewed was great on paper, and knew his stuff about games, so we put him on the door to greet customers for a couple of hours. He was suddenly very shy, so I had a chat with him and told him there's nothing to worry about and he just needs to be a warm, open, friendly face for customers. He must not have really got what I meant, because the next guy who came through the door he greeted with a massive good morning and walked up to him with open arms as if he wanted to hug him. The customer just turned around and walked straight out the store again. I was a director at a company and was interviewing an applicant for a low-level tech position. It seemed very beneath him given his background. He previously worked for a gaming company. Things were going well and in my mind the guy pretty much had the job. Until we were talking and he looked out the window of the conference room to the team of techs sitting in the knock. The guy stands up to get a better view and first thing he commented on was one of the female techs on my staff. "Oh, you have cute girls on the team." First time in over 20 years I've ever heard that question during an interview and I was shocked, but wanted to see where this was going. Was he for or against female techs? Let's see. So I tell him yeah, we have several on staff and they're all great. Dude is still looking out the window and has not turned his head the whole time. Just staring, the creepy way. He responds with something about how do you get any work done with those T walking around distracting you all day. My spidey senses pick up on what a headache and HR nightmare this guy will be if I hired him, so I start wrapping up the interview. Now had he written that he was a creepy perv on his resume he would have saved us both a lot of time. And yes, that guy beat my previous bad interviewee where the applicant asked if he would have to work with a lot of niggers with the hard R. Dude was serious too. Just asked it the same way you would ask if the coffee in the break room is any good. Interviewed a guy for a position working with kids. I was desperate to get a guy on board and so long as there weren't red flags, I was going to hire him on the spot. We started off well, with him having experience in scouting and leading programs. Then I asked what's your discipline style with kids and everything flipped upside down. He responded with well, I really like yelling at them. And if that doesn't work I'd isolate and humiliate them so they aren't a part of the group anymore. And they'll be too ashamed to cause trouble. That's abuse. I didn't want to risk trying to train that instinct out of him, since there would be portions of the day he'd be unsupervised with a group of children in stressful situations. So I ended the interview and told him I'd contact him regarding the position. I was new to hiring and had yet to tell someone to their face they weren't getting the job. The next day he called and asked when he and his brother were going to start. His brother did not apply for the position, and this was the first I was hearing about him. It was an interesting experience. I help students prepare for med school interviews, and will often do mock interviews with them. The amount of students who have told me the main reason for wanting to be a doctor is that they thought it would be exciting to decide if a patient lives or dies, is equally shocking and disturbing. Interviewed a girl who once we were alone offered a sexual favor for the job. I thought she was joking so I laughed and continued the interview, but she again stopped me by slowly moving her hand up my leg and grabbing my balls. I got up, pushed her away and told her to leave. She called the cops and said I assaulted her, but I had security footage and other employees' witnesses and got her to stop. Guy just out of college had SQL listed twice on his resume, once in a skills section and once in a sort of achievement what I have produced section. We asked him to tell us about how he uses it, how he learned it, etc, and he goes, oh, I actually don't know how to use it, I just put it on my resume to look better. He did not get the job. Select distinct, lang, from resume. I just offered a sweet older woman a job. While we were filling out paperwork she starts telling me about how wonderful her son is. I thought she was trying to set me up when she says he helps people lose weight and offered me his number. Know someone who was sitting on a panel and asked the guy to explain a time that if he could go back he'd do something differently to get a better outcome. He talked about when he found out one of his staff was harassing a girl. Said I wish I would have just told him to stop it sooner cause she made it drag on so long. He did not get the job that involved managing 30 odd people. My dad ended up sitting in on the interview of his former bully. He says he was asked by the VP to sit in, but he didn't say a word. The guy recognized my dad and completely flubbed the interview. Bruh, what a power move by your dad. somewhat related, but I used to work at this Japanese restaurant, and one day my boss had me pick up a potential new cook from the bus station. When I pulled up there I saw him finishing a tall boy of Bud Light. I was thinking, oh man, this might not be good. He got in the car and seemed okay, so I offered him some gum which he accepted and thanked me for. When we got to the restaurant, I didn't see much of him because I was out in the front, but man did I hear a lot. While the owner Carol and the other cooks were training him on what to do, he kept freaking up and knocking things over. Carol was a really intense person, crazy bee as most would say, and liked to berate people at first, but I have never seen her as mad as when this guy accidentally lit a rag on fire. That was it, she screamed. You're fired. Get the frick out. She had me drive him back to bus station, which was one of the most awkward car rides I have ever had. I interviewed for a job and it went well, up until the point where I asked about the hours. The interviewer said they started at 8:30 but most people were in the office by 8. He tried to make out this was a good thing as they had a committed team. I was offered a job but turned it down cause frick that. If they pay me for the hours I work, I'll work hard, but if they're trying to squeeze extra from me right from the start then frick them. I recently did an interview with someone who had a lot of managerial experience in stores and was now applying for a job that was not managerial at all. So, we asked him how he felt about not being in charge anymore. He told us that he was willing to accept this huge step down, but that he expected to have a managerial function within 6 months. We blinked and asked him why he felt that way. This is when he told us that he is not only great at learning, but that usually it takes only a few months for people to see how brilliant I am. But after that, I am always very quickly promoted to a place that allows me to lead people in the right direction and showcase excellence. Dude, you managed a shoe store. You weren't the leader of the free world. I once interviewed a candidate in a coffee shop that was usually very quiet and empty. Everything was going well and the conversation was flowing. Every time I looked down to make some notes she started to giggle and I finally asked her what was funny. She told me the guy behind me kept winking at her, and so naturally, I looked behind and there wasn't a single soul in sight. I moved on and continued the interview and she kept telling me about all the times guys have approached her and how she had to leave her last job because all the men in the office wanted her. Needless to say, she wasn't wanted at my office. Police. We had one applicant who did well during the fitness test and the interview board. Prior military and a 4-year degree as well. We put him at the top of the list and was slotted for the next academy. During the polygraph he lied during the animal abuse questions. When we asked him about a possible error he told us that he used to have relations with his female German Shepherd. He was not hired for obvious reasons. WTF. I was interviewing someone to work at an after-school program and supervise kids. Interview was going fairly well and I asked what strategies would you use to manage student behavior. The applicant, obviously not sure what to say, pauses for a while and then said, well, I definitely wouldn't hit them. I mean, that's not a horrible response. They knew enough to know that was the wrong answer. Some teaching would have taught them some good options. As part of a group we did first round interviews for a busy reception job using a speakerphone. During the first candidate's call, it was going great, but then someone on our team bumped the phone and accidentally hung it up. When we dialed back, it was clear she was P and she proceeded to handle the rest of the interview like she was doing us a favor, despite our apologies. Turns out that mistake gave us a great tool to use during the rest of our interview process. We didn't want an inflexible person who couldn't deal with small mistakes. They needed to be comfortable with a little bit of chaos. During the rest of the phone interviews, we accidentally hung up on each one at one point to see how they responded when we called back. It was a very effective practical test. We loved the person we ended up hiring. Had a guy apply for a management position back when I worked fast food. The application was great. The interview was great too. Maybe a little too great. There was something I didn't like about how he had the right answer for everything, and it bothered me that all his jobs had contact info on his resume except his last one. So I went in the back and did some digging to find the exact location he had worked about. Then finally got a hold of them only to hear that not only had he lied about the position he had in management, but he had been fired halfway through management training for stealing from the safe. I went out and told him we'll call you to let you know how we are proceeding, and then never did. I like to end all of my interviews with a casual conversation, icebreaker questions and really easy small talk. I find that if we hire the person it makes the first few days less formal. Anyways, it was September and I was interviewing a recent college grad. When I got to the small talk I asked why he wanted the job and he went on a freaking diatribe about how his parents were making him get a job and pay rent and how unfair it was. I was 100% going to recommend him until he essentially showed how much of an entitled brat he was. I asked this guy how he handled individuals in crisis and he launched into a long story about the various times he was investigated for assaulting children and the group homes he worked at. He concluded the story with "I was never convicted. Sometimes those kids just act up because they need a good butt whooping." He seemed dumbfounded when I ended it there. That's terrifying. I work in a related field and it's incredibly stressful to know that sometimes people can hide that side of themselves. At least he came right out in the open with it. There need to be better systems in place to prevent sick people like this from working with kids and adults who are vulnerable. My mom was interviewing people for a CNA position at a nursing home. One of the candidates brought up how she cuts off people's moles and collects them for fun. My mom told her, "I don't have time for this," and walked out. I've done a lot of interviews. The one that stands out that took a 180 was at one moment, I thought I'm going to hire this guy. Towards the end of the interview he started dropping racial slurs. I ended it right there and thankfully dodged a bullet by not hiring this guy. This girl seemed great on paper, had an excellent phone interview, and then in person she failed miserably. I work in a corporate office that very clearly has a very professional business dress code. Men wear suits and ties, ladies wear the feminine equivalent. She was interviewing for our intern position, so when we have college kids come in, I judge less harshly because they are young and may not have a super professional wardrobe yet. That being said, though, I still expect them to try pants that aren't jeans, or at least black or very dark jeans, a dress, a sweater, something. Make some kind of an effort to look professional. This girl, in addition to rescheduling twice and still showing up late, she showed up wearing a t-shirt with a zip-up North Face fleece jacket over top with her keys dangling from a lanyard around her neck. She also had her hair up in a ponytail on top of her head in a huge scrunchie. The best of all were the super holey jeans and Ugg boots. What? Had an application that looked pretty decent. Definitely was going to get an interview until seeing the part about previous work experience. They had previous jobs in the field, but in the part where it says reason for leaving, they put too many Mexicans. Interviewed a guy for a retail job. Not 5 minutes into the interview I asked him why he left his previous job and he answered it was a pretty good job, but some of my co-workers were real "see you next Tuesdays." I didn't understand the phrase, so I asked him to repeat himself and he says "see you next Tuesdays." You know, see. Guy walks in. I recognize him as a guy I replaced when I was hired 3 years earlier. He was terminated for getting the company into a lawsuit after he failed to report a wreck involving members on the vehicle. I tell my boss to check his no hire status with HR. Yep, permanent. Hiring a copy editor. If you're not familiar, it's proofreading, fact checking, and doing rewrites to make sure everything reads smoothly and correctly. This guy interviewed really well and had a strong resume, so we emailed him our editing test to take and send back to us. It was a document that hadn't gone through any editing. I had painstakingly edited and rewritten the same document when I'd applied about a few years earlier. He sent it back to us with no edits. Just a note, I would send this back to the writer. Nope, you have to show us that you can edit and how you do it. From then on, we sent the editing test first before we agreed to an interview. Interview is going well until we ask him about if he has anything he needs to improve on. He straight up says no. The other guy asked him again if he had any weaknesses. He said he didn't have any weaknesses. That is where we decided it wasn't going to happen. I hate that question. Want my honest answer? I procrastinate like you wouldn't believe if I don't want to do a task. I didn't come in at 5 AM to get a head start in my day. I came in at 5 cause I still had to write 3 performance reviews before 8. We had a computer assessment as part of the interview process. A lady I interviewed was doing well up until that part. She sat there whispering crap, crap, crap under her breath, again and again. for the whole duration of the computer assessment. Suffice to say, she didn't do too well on the assessment. Things were going well until the last phone call. This guy came in as part of a group interview for our phone room during the GFC. I was running the recruitment. We had over 400 applicants for a dozen or so jobs. This guy, he was alright in the phone screen. Knew a girl in the contact center. She said he was okay, so I got him in. I interviewed his with another team leader and I dunno. My gut just told me something wasn't right. His answers were good enough. He was polite. But the feeling stuck with me. No one else had any objections, but I kept mentioning to my manager that something was off. He encouraged me to trust my gut, with nothing but my inkling to go on. I called his references. First one was glowing. His line manager at the car yard said he was wonderful. Couldn't fault him. I should hire him. 100%. My gut still said no. This kid one hurdle left. The second referee. For me, it was my last chance to prove myself right. I called the second referee. This time it was the owner of the car yard, his boss's boss. I introduce myself. Tell him it's a referee check for this kid. Silence. Then the owner asks me, is this confidential? Gotham. The owner went off. He's always calling in sick. And everyone knows he's not sick. Unreliable. Lazy. The list went on. I thanked him for his time, hung up the phone, and breathed a massive sigh of relief. Called the young guy back a bit later to deliver the news that he wasn't getting the job. My manager was chuffed. Pro tip: unless you know someone's giving you a good reference, don't put them down. And if you're recruiting, trust your gut and pull at that thread. Best hire I never made, and it all came down to the final phone call. The guy who stole whole industrial sized tins of Milo. Now I didn't hire him, but that's another story. After I mentioned a pre-employment background check being required, just to give you full disclosure, I was charged for beating up my ex-girlfriend, but she's lying and exaggerated to the cops, and I'm really good with people. The applicant just stood up and walked away, mid-conversation, without excusing themselves, like they had the sudden urge to poop or something, and not get back. Was interviewing a gentleman for a volunteer position with a well-known non-profit organization. In this role he would have been dealing directly with vulnerable people. Within 5 minutes he made an off-color joke about smoking crack on the weekend, and when we said we would need to have a police check completed, he said, "Don't worry, you won't find anything. It's not like I'm into child pee." And that was it for me, lol. Another one. Interviewing for an low-end programmer position. Woman's resume came in that had lots of programming information on it. She knew every language we could think of and more. She appeared perfect. She knew ATX86 and 68,000 assembly. Awesome. So did I. So I asked something like, what does MoveX BX do as a warm-up and what is wrong with it? No idea. She couldn't answer it at all. BTW in ATX86 it uses mov not move. 68,000 uses move. Asked a 68,000 base question. Not any better. So on to higher level questions. Nothing good. Finally I asked her how to write hello world in ANSI. Nothing. Last question. Write hello world in any language. Heck, at this point a DOS-BAT command of echo hello world would have been good. But she couldn't do it. I finally asked her why she has so many languages on her resume when she clearly doesn't know them. Her answer: I know of them. Fascipum. At one point I did acquisitions, usually large-scale procurements of multi-million-dollar goods and services. I applied for a director of procurement position with the state govt and tried to sell myself by talking about the scope of my current position and that I was far beyond pens and pencils with my skill set. When I asked about the type of procurement they conducted, the interviewer, in a very flat tone, said, "Pens and pencils." Definitely cringed. Learned some humility on that one, as I excused myself from the interview and headed back to the office. Not an interviewer, but the admin involved in greeting and escorting to interview room. Department was based in a different building to the main office, and all interview invites specified the address to go to was not the main building. It wasn't uncommon for candidates to go the wrong building because they just googled the company name. They automatically made a bad impression because they failed to read and follow instructions, but I'd still pop up to the other building and escort them to the right place. Buildings only 3 minutes apart. so most of the time it wasn't an issue as they'd turn up a little early anyway. The reason I always fetched them rather than just tell them where the building was and let them come to us. One candidate arrived 10 minutes early at the other building and was told instructions on how to get here from main building. They're not hard. 3 minutes. 5 tops to get here normally. They finally made it 45 minutes after the interview was due to start. I secretly admire them actually turning up after that long, rather than just ghosting us. This was fairly recently. The candidate I was interviewing asked me if I had ever fired someone. I answered that I hadn't, since I had only been a supervisor for about 2 years, and even with employees who didn't perform well, I gave chances to improve and never took disciplinary action of any sort. I never wrote anyone up. I was actually sort of proud to tell her this. I later found out that she had been fired from her job, which she didn't tell me about, and she was probing to see what sort of personality I have. While this was fine as an analysis in itself, the fact is that me not taking disciplinary action toward certain employees has actually resulted in inefficiencies, mistakes, and burdens directly on me and our organization. For example, I never get upset when people are late. Some arrive 1.5 hours after they're technically supposed to, and guess who has to fill in the time while they take a few extra hours to sleep? That's right, me. So then I'm stressed and miserable, doing 10 things at once. I think that maybe I should reassess my own generosity, and that maybe you can't always prioritize your employees. And that person I was interviewing was looking to exploit it. I never followed up with her. I once interviewed a guy to be a shipping assistant, boxing stuff up and printing labels in a warehouse, who asked me, "You know how many jobs are open right now? You think I need to work here?" I sent him along to the next interview. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.